If your heart races fastest for the person who barely texts back, if you feel most alive chasing someone who's emotionally unavailable, if you've built a pattern of loving people who seem to need saving, you are not broken, and you are not alone. But you might be caught in one of the most misunderstood patterns in modern relationships. Psychologists call it the rescuer dynamic, and it can quietly convince you that being needed is the same thing as being loved. It is not. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why your brain makes that mistake, and what you can do to finally love someone who simply loves you back. Let's start with a question. Think about the last few people you've been deeply attracted to. Were they emotionally steady, available, consistent? Or were they a little distant? A little wounded? Someone with a story you felt only you could understand? If you're nodding right now, you're recognizing something real. There's a specific kind of chemistry that gets triggered not by safety, but by struggle. And understanding where that chemistry comes from is the first step to changing it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. For many people, the intensity we call falling in love is not actually about the other person at all. It's about a feeling inside ourselves, the feeling of being essential. Of being the one who fixes things. Of being irreplaceable because someone else is falling apart and we are the one holding them together. That feeling can be intoxicating. It can feel like purpose. It can feel like destiny. But often, it's actually an old survival strategy wearing the costume of romance. This pattern has a name in psychology. It's sometimes called the rescuer or helper role, and it's closely tied to something researchers describe as contingent self-worth, meaning your sense of value depends on external conditions rather than existing unconditionally. When your self-worth becomes tied to being useful to someone else, you don't just want to help the people you love. You start to need to be needed. And that need can quietly steer who you're attracted to, long before you consciously choose them. This isn't a character flaw. It's a strategy that likely worked for you once. Many people who fall into rescuer patterns learned early in life, often in childhood, that love was something you had to earn by being useful, by managing someone else's emotions, by being the responsible one, the calm one, the fixer. Maybe you grew up around a parent who was anxious, depressed, addicted, or simply overwhelmed, and you learned that your job was to help them feel okay. Not because anyone told you explicitly, but because that's where you got attention, approval, a sense of being important. So your nervous system learned an equation, and it's one you probably never consciously agreed to: closeness equals being useful. Love equals being needed. And peace, actual, uneventful, mutual peace, can start to feel unfamiliar. Even boring. Even suspicious. That's the paradox at the heart of this pattern. The relationships that are calm and reciprocal can feel less like love, simply because they don't activate that old, familiar system. Meanwhile, someone who is a little chaotic, a little hard to reach, a little in need of saving, lights up all the old circuitry that once meant, "This is where I matter." Human attraction isn't purely about who's attractive on paper. It's shaped heavily by what feels familiar to our nervous system, and familiar is not the same as healthy. Psychologists who study attachment, the emotional bonding patterns we develop in early relationships, have found that we tend to gravitate toward dynamics that echo our early experiences of love, even when those experiences were painful. This is sometimes described as repetition compulsion, a concept that traces back to early psychoanalytic theory and still shows up in modern attachment research: the unconscious pull to recreate emotional situations from our past, this time hoping for a different outcome. If your early experience of love involved earning attention through caretaking, then adult relationships where someone needs rescuing can feel like coming home. Your body reads the chaos as chemistry. Your nervous system mistakes anxiety for a spark. There's also a reward-based piece to this. Psychologically, being needed activates something real and rewarding: a sense of competence, of mattering, of having an important role. Some researchers connect this to the psychological concept of self-efficacy, the belief that our actions produce meaningful results. When we rescue someone, even in small ways, we get a hit of that feeling: I did something. I mattered. I helped. And when that feeling becomes the main source of our self-esteem, we start unconsciously seeking situations, and people, who let us keep earning it. Here's the trap, though. A relationship built on one person needing rescue and the other person needing to rescue is not actually intimacy. It's a role play with a script. One person plays struggling, the other plays strong and steady, and both stay stuck in their roles because the relationship's entire structure depends on those roles never changing. If the struggling partner starts to heal and stabilize, the rescuer can, strangely, feel less secure, less essential, even a little bit threatened. Not because they want their partner to suffer, but because their sense of value was built on being needed, not just being loved. This is why so many rescuer pattern relationships feel intensely passionate at first, and then exhausting over time. The highs are real, moments of feeling deeply connected, deeply important. But they're followed by cycles of disappointment, because a relationship can't be sustained long-term on one person's crisis and the other person's rescue. Eventually the rescuer feels drained, unseen, and quietly resentful, while still telling themselves this is what love looks like. The good news is this: once you can name the pattern, you can start to interrupt it. And that's what the rest of this video is about, not shaming yourself for how you learn to love, but giving you real, practical tools to recognize the pattern in real time, and slowly build a different, healthier equation. One where love doesn't require someone to be falling apart in order for you to feel close to them. So let's talk about how to actually recognize and shift this pattern, starting with the first core insight: learning to spot one-sided dynamics before you're in too deep. One-sided dynamics rarely announce themselves clearly. They tend to disguise themselves as intensity, as chemistry, as a deep connection that happened fast. So instead of asking yourself, does this feel intense, start asking a more useful question: does this feel mutual? Mutuality shows up in small, unglamorous ways. Does this person ask about your day as often as you ask about theirs? Do they show curiosity about your inner world, or do conversations always circle back to their crises? When you're struggling, do they show up for you the way you show up for them? A useful practice here is what some relationship researchers call tracking the emotional ledger, not in a transactional, scorekeeping way, but simply noticing, over weeks and months, who initiates support, who asks questions, who remembers details, who shows up during hard moments. In healthy relationships, this ledger evens out over time. In rescuer dynamics, it almost never does. You'll notice you're always the one reaching, always the one adjusting, always the one absorbing the emotional weather of the relationship, while the other person stays mostly the same, needing, receiving, rarely reciprocating. The second insight is learning to tolerate the discomfort of not being needed. This might sound strange, but for people with a strong rescuer pattern, being with someone stable and self-sufficient can initially feel like something is missing. That's not because something is actually wrong, it's because your nervous system is used to earning connection through crisis management, and calm can register as unfamiliar, even unsafe. So here's a practice: the next time you're with someone emotionally healthy and things feel quiet, resist the urge to interpret that quiet as boredom or distance. Instead, gently ask yourself, can I let this be enough? Can I let myself be loved without having to fix, manage, or save anything right now? This is uncomfortable at first, almost like a muscle you haven't used. But every time you sit with that discomfort instead of chasing the next crisis to solve, you're teaching your nervous system a new equation: connection can exist without me being essential to someone else's survival. It also helps to get curious about your own emotional needs, separate from anyone else's. Rescuer patterns often develop because, as children, we learn to focus intensely on other people's emotions and neglect our own. So part of healing this pattern is turning that same attentiveness inward. Ask yourself regularly, what do I actually need right now? What am I feeling underneath the urge to help someone else feel better? This isn't selfish, it's the foundation of a relationship where both people can show up as whole individuals, rather than one person perpetually holding up the other. The third insight ties the first two together: learning to evaluate relationships based on mutual connection, rather than emotional intensity or how needed you feel. Intensity is not the same as intimacy. A relationship that feels like a roller coaster, full of highs, lows, uncertainty, and a partner who occasionally disappears only to pull you back in, can feel like passion, but it's often something closer to anxious attachment activation. True intimacy tends to feel different, steadier, warmer, sometimes even a little less dramatic. It's built through consistency, through both people showing curiosity about each other, through both people being allowed to have off days without the entire relationship depending on one person managing the other's crisis. A practical way to apply this is to pause, especially early in dating someone new, and ask yourself a few honest questions. Would I still be drawn to this person if they weren't struggling with something? Am I attracted to who they are, or to the role I get to play in their life? If this person became calm, secure, and didn't need me in a dramatic way, would the spark still be there? These questions aren't about judging the other person. They're about understanding your own patterns clearly enough to make conscious choices, instead of unconsciously repeating old roles. It's worth saying clearly, wanting to support a partner through hard times is not, by itself, a rescuer pattern. Every healthy relationship involves showing up for each other during struggle. The difference is whether support flows both ways, and whether your sense of being loved depends on someone continuously needing to be saved. Healthy support is occasional and reciprocal. Rescuer dynamics are constant and one-directional, with your own worth quietly riding on the outcome. Changing this pattern doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't mean swearing off connection or becoming guarded. It means slowly recalibrating what your nervous system associates with love, moving away from, I am valuable because I am needed, and toward, I am valuable because I exist, and I get to choose relationships based on how mutual, how steady, and how genuinely seen I feel. That shift, small as it sounds, can change the entire trajectory of who you're drawn to, and who you build a life with. If you recognized yourself in this pattern today, that recognition itself is progress. Awareness is always the first step toward change, and simply understanding why you're drawn to certain dynamics gives you the power to start choosing differently, deliberately, gently, one relationship at a time. If this video helped you understand your own patterns a little better, consider subscribing. We break down the psychology behind the relationship patterns that shape our lives, not to diagnose or label you, but to help you understand yourself with more clarity and more compassion. There's a lot more to explore, and I'd love to have you along for it.